I'm Charlie Bride of Gold Derby, and today I'm speaking with Sacha Jenkins, the director of the Apple TV Plus documentary Louis Armstrong, Black and Blues, as part of our Meet the Experts film documentary panel. How familiar were you with Louis Armstrong as both a musician and a cultural figure before you started working on this documentary?
Well, growing up in Queens, New York, I knew that Armstrong at one point lived in Queens. I knew that there was a elementary school or a junior high school named after him. I knew the hits, and that was about it. I knew he was really good at what he did, and that was pretty much the extent of it.
What made you want to, having that very basic understanding of him, what made you want to make a documentary film that centered on his life and his work?
Well, the nice people over at Imagine Entertainment called me with the opportunity, and I dove in and did the research, and I was completely floored by what I learned about Armstrong. He was the exact opposite of who I thought he might have been, based on being a young Black kid in New York in the 80s, finding my identity, being into sort of this Black consciousness that hip hop was sort of delivering at the time. And, his mannerisms and what I thought I knew about him felt contrary to the revolution, or felt contrary to sort of being pro-Black, based on what other people might have said, not based on what I knew, but what older people might have said, or based on my perception of how he carried himself. And when I did the research, it was completely the opposite of that. And I found out that he was probably the most talented person ever. And I can't name anyone in the modern era who had as many talents and on the level of talent that he had.
So one of the interesting choices you made with this movie is, even though it's this documentary about a musician, you did have the choice to have original music for the film, scored by Terence Blanchard. And I'm wondering as to why you chose to have original music for the film rather than just the music of Louis Armstrong.
Well, there's plenty of music from Louis Armstrong, but the music that Blanchard made, who was a master musician from New Orleans, he knew not to make something that would compete with Armstrong. If anything, it would enhance the film and support the film. So he was very conscious of making music that wouldn't compete or try to step on, because you never could step on the music of Louis Armstrong. So we had the full blessing of the folks who are the wards of the everything that is Louis Armstrong, but at the end of the day, the music also costs money. You couldn't, even if I wanted to have wall-to-wall Armstrong music, it would exponentially raise what it would cost to make it. But at the same time, to get an original score from Terence Blanchard, I mean, what could be better than that?
I'm having trouble thinking of anything that could be better than that. One of the things I like about how you link everything in the film together is that there are that certain parts are shown like through animation, especially like certain things that Armstrong had said that we see on recordings. And I was wondering what kind of effort went into creating those animated bits of the film.
Well, there's an artist that I work with on all my films. His name is Hector Arias, and he is a bit of a savant when it comes to these kinds of things. And we wanted to do something that got you closer to understanding who Armstrong was. And in real life, Armstrong made this collage art, not for the public, but for his own self-enjoyment. And we felt that finding a way to emulate his style of art would only get us that much closer to understanding who he was and getting us closer into how he thought. So it was a way to marry the visual aesthetic of Armstrong that a lot of people don't know about with the man himself.
Did you learn anything about Armstrong during the course of making the film that really surprised you or caught you off guard?
Well, again, I fancy myself a Renaissance man, but I'm not a Renaissance man with the level of skill that Armstrong had. And the fact that he was, not formally educated and was like a prolific writer, to me, said a lot. I was a fan of his artwork. The way he sang changed the way popular music was recorded, changed the way people sang. on his instrument, he was a pioneer. He was funny. He wasn't trying to be a comedian. He was just naturally funny. And he just reminded me of people I grew up with. You know, you grow up with people in the inner city who don't have social capital, don't have the opportunities, but have all this talent and don't always have ways to funnel it. And sometimes they wind up behind bars the way Armstrong did. But I found a lot of inspiration, but I also felt like he was a character I knew. And that's why, in many ways, one of the reasons why I reached out to Nas to be the narrator of the film. He and I grew up in the same neighborhood. And for us, you know, so many of us didn't make it. But for us in Queens, the part of Queens that I'm from, Nas was our personal Louis Armstrong.
Was there anything with Armstrong that or that you learned that you found out about Armstrong that you thought was really interesting, but for one reason or another you couldn't include it in the documentary and it ended up on the cutting room floor? Was there any material like that you had for this?
Yeah, I mean, he, in many ways, he felt duped. You know, he was an ambassador for the United States government and for the United States people with his instrument around the world. And, you know, he started to feel duped by the government because obviously, you know, people like him or people who look like him weren't treated as full citizens. And he's very frustrated by America. And, you know, you're in these foreign countries, particularly in Africa, and, you know, you're looking at the shiny object, which is Armstrong, but there are things happening behind the scenes that the government might have been involved with that weren't necessarily savory. So it's a very complicated story inside of that that you need a whole film to get into, to unpack. I only had an hour and 44 minutes. There's no way I could have unpacked that in 6 minutes.
I was wondering if you could also go into a bit of detail about the struggle, the dichotomy that Armstrong had as a, you know, a pop culture figure, but also, you know, at this weird time where, you know, the civil rights movement was coming into focus, and how he felt like did he feel like he had to address that, or did he walk that tightrope? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated because at the end of the day, he's just an artist. He didn't sign up to be a civil rights activist, right? So he's a man of a different time. He's in movies where he's singing to horses, right? So if you're a Black revolutionary or a young Black person who has a certain level of consciousness, you see a man singing to a horse, you're going to think that's not really cool. As a matter of fact, it's like, you know, it's racist. It's all these kinds of things, right? But Armstrong was a man of a different time. And he was also a man of a certain age. And so when civil rights was happening, why would you expect him to, you know, sort of march and put his life on the line? I mean, people were being physically attacked. And he had a fear of, you know, getting wrapped in the mouth with a billy club or something like that. And his position was, you know, I contribute by, you know, making donations to certain causes. And if I get wrapped in the mouth at a protest, there's no way I can contribute anymore. I can't put up any money. And so you've got to consider the time that he's from. You got to consider this is a guy who's born in the South in 1901, which is just basically slavery ended in 65, but probably not really in 1901 if you're in the South. So he had to, if you think about the emotional, psychological, and spiritual jujitsu that he had to perform to become who he became, you know, you have a different sort of idea on who he is, because most people would have just wanted to fight or said to hell with all this and would have cracked under the pressure. But because he was able to find creative ways to keep going, I mean, he's the reason why so many Black artists have had the opportunities. Before him, there was no one. There was no global pop star before. He's the first pop star, regardless of color. But before him, there, you know, he's the first African American to have a radio show, the first African American to get proper billing in a film. I mean, so many firsts happened because of Armstrong. And if he didn't carry himself the way that he did, he would have been murdered.
Well, Sacha, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel in just a little bit.
For sure. Thank you.